hopefully I'll be able to add to it. All right, so welcome to Telna's first Lunch and Learn. I'm going to be the first presenter here, and if you guys can see my screen, you will see I am discussing communication for transparency and productivity at Telna. And it's all about changing the ways we communicate to better enable transparency and obviously productivity. I'm sure a lot of you who get a lot of pings in your DMs will be really psyched for this presentation, as hopefully it'll lead to you being disturbed less in getting more done. And for those of you who are looking around for things at Telna that you want to do in a remote setting, a lot of this stuff should help as well. So we're going to cover a few concepts on what we want to be, essentially using to gain productivity and to gain transparency. And hopefully, I can convince you guys to enact some of these concepts in your day-to-day work, and we'll see some good outcomes from it. So to get started, I'm going to be talking about the idea of flow state. And a lot of you have probably experienced a flow state before. It's something in which you're fully engaged and challenged, but it's not too far above your skill level, and it's not too far below. So it's in that good middle ground where you feel like, okay, I like what I'm doing, I'm fully engaged, I'm not thinking about anything else, and it's commonly characterized by a loss of a sense of time as well. So, if you've read a really good book and you've gotten lost in it, you might have been in a flow state. If you've been participating in physical activity or art or coding or video games or board games, a whole bunch of things can put you in this sort of mental state where you're at your max productivity and you're doing essentially the maximum that you can do for that time period. However, a lot of the things we do in our day-to-day work kind of challenge this idea that we can get into the flow state. And a lot of our communication has a big part to play in that. So, if you're receiving a whole bunch of instant messages or something while you're in the middle of a coding exercise or in the middle of a drawing, it definitely changes the way that you're able to concentrate. And flow states are not as easy to enter as, one may think. In fact, the average worker experiences 87 interruptions a day, and it takes on average 23 minutes to get back on task. And a lot of people here are very aware of that, and it's great. And I would love to, sort of give like a shout out to those people who block off time where they don't enable interruptions, they're focused on their one task. Those hours that you block off are going to be the most productive hours of your day easily, and I'm sure that's probably why you continue to do them. So we're going to go on to our kind of next slide, where can we find flow? So finding flow is definitely a huge challenge. As I said, you want to be in the middle between where you find it too challenging, but you still feel, a bit of that anxious feeling that you get when you're, at the very edge of your ability. But you can set up your environment to enable better flow. Things like using do not disturb mode, putting away distractions like your phone. Some people like to use music, particularly music without lyrics that can distract you is a great help for some people. Blocking off or structuring your time is another great way to do that. As I said before, if you put a block on your calendar where nobody can reach you, that's an excellent time to reach into a flow state, as well as breaking up your goals into small achievable amounts so you feel like, okay, I'm challenged at my limit by this goal. It's not super boring. I'm not doing, the most monotonous part of my day here. But I'm also not looking at a giant wall of text being like, I'll never be able to conquer this. So sort of dynamically allocating your goals can be a huge help. So it's also important to sort of plan your day around your focused hours as much as you possibly can. Especially when dealing with meetings, this can be quite challenging. But we do it every day and we don't even realize it. When we have our stand-ups in the morning, at 9 a.m. or something, most people don't step into work and be like, okay, I'm immediately in my flow state. And the people who do probably showed up at 5 a.m. But if you can manage it such that if your most productive and focused hours are, say, like 2 to 4 p.m., try to see if people can move their meetings around that such that you're not able to maximize your focus time. It's also important to let people know when you're busy. Again, putting it in your calendar, putting yourself on do not disturb mode so people know, okay, he's going to be working right now. At the end of the 2 hours, I'll reach out to him, but right now he's the most productive he'll be. And it's important to remember that productivity is everybody's business, right? And that comes down to how you use your communication. If you can't reach somebody on Slack and you phone them, then you might be interrupting one of the most productive hours of their day. So sometimes it helps to just realize, okay, we're in an asynchronous community here. I'm going to send them the message. If I get it back an hour later, I'll be okay. Obviously, this can't happen for every team, and I felt really bad for the signaling team when writing this, because obviously if things go down, you need to know. So again, you have to be able to know how to set up your environment to find flow, but also, maximize your availability for when people really need it. So how can we change the places in which we communicate to better enable this? So a great usage of Slack is using things such as channels, particularly public channels. If you're able to post in a channel where they're going to check it when they're done all their stuff, rather than in a direct message, you can save them a lot of time going back and forth between different direct messages and allow them to handle it all in a steady flow. So by posting on these proper channels, you can reduce distractions, save employee time and money by allowing them to focus easier, reduce confusion by keeping relevant information together, particularly so you're not, messaging different information in 3 different threads. It can be kind of confusing when you have to go back and be like, okay, I got to go to 1, 4, 6. If you keep it all in one space where everybody can follow along, that's a really helpful thing for enabling people to streamline their workflow. As well, when you post in proper channels, you have the ability to create permanent knowledge. There's a really important idea about the fact that you only have a limited number of keystrokes in your entire life. And if I write something in a direct message, it'll be, hopefully remembered, but it can be forgotten in the next 30 minutes. Whereas if it's somewhere that's documented online, say in a code base or in the comments of a Google Doc or even in a Slack channel, people can read that anytime they want. If they need to remember what happened 2 weeks ago, search functions are really good these days. And the fact that you can find that information easily will help streamline the process and as well make it more visible and accountable as to what you're doing. And when you make things public as well, it also helps you save time reiterating. You don't have to write the same stuff over and over again. You'll probably write it better as well. I know, the difference between me writing a Slack DM to somebody and writing something that I know is going to go into documentation, I put a lot more effort in my documentation, I'm not going to lie, because I know that will be reflected on me. And what's also excellent is the fact that by putting it in public spaces, you're allowing people who might not otherwise see it to come in and challenge your ideas. They might make edits. For instance, in this presentation, I've had 2 people come in and give me edit advice for things that I would have missed. And if I had kept it all to myself, I wouldn't really be aware of the mistakes I made probably before I started this. It's also about managing signal to noise ratios, and signal to noise ratios are a really important concept. I'm sure most of the signaling team can tell you. It's the idea that there's some actionable items that happen in your workday that come through the messages. However, there's also noise around that. So if you post every channel and just scrunch it all up into one, you might see like 30 happy birthdays and then, the Ash VPN is down or something. And it would seem like there was a lot of noise, like, oh no, I had to sift through 30 happy birthday messages. But if you put it in a happy birthday channel, you can still go celebrate your birthday. You can send all the jokes you want, but also those important moments where people have to work are in their own spot that can be easily checked upon later. So another thing to discuss, obviously, when we're talking about communication is meetings and this concept of knowledge leaking. In a synchronous meeting, particularly, if it's like we are doing right now, if it wasn't recorded, a lot of you could easily forget everything I say. And, if I didn't make notes or if I didn't make this PowerPoint, it can be really tough for people to come back to things, particularly if they're important. So being aware of the idea of knowledge leaks can help you realize, okay, where are we losing out this information that's passed in between us? And how can I prevent this? Obviously, this doesn't mean doing no synchronous meetings. This just means that we need to think of ways that we can note this down in a more permanent solution. Things like doing recordings. There's a lot of companies that are recording almost all of their meetings now, particularly because it makes it easier to go back and see, okay, why did we make this decision? What did we do wrong? Or what did we do right in our meetings? And by having notes and by having recorded sessions, it's much easier to see what's been going on rather than just thinking, oh yeah, 3 weeks ago I made a decision that might not have been a good idea. So there's a huge case there for asynchronous communication writing. We do it every day in our Slack channels. And it's really important to think, okay, when do I need a meeting and when can this be a message? This has been like a tale as old as time. I'm sure a lot of you have been in meetings where you're like, that could have been an email. And a lot of you have been in meetings that were like, wow, that was a really good meeting. So if we can sift out those could have been emails and leave only good meetings, you'll get much more satisfaction from your meeting participants because they know it's going to be a quality time when you're in that meeting because a lot of important things will be exchanged. And again, it's just getting that signal to noise ratio proper. So utilizing written communication as well means people are less hour to hour in their work. I'm sure, as a lot of parents here know, having your kids home all day, you're probably not the most productive when your kids are asking you how to unmute their Zoom so they can talk to their teacher. But using written communication, you can interface with that literally any hour of the day. So if you know that you have something that's not a pressing matter but still needs to get done, then making sure that it's in a written format will allow people to not only comment on it, but also interface with it and allow you to get your work done when you feel you are best on. Well thought out written communication is also a form of like documentation in a way as well. By keeping things written, it's going to be up there for, basically as long as you want to keep it up there for. And really well-written communication can show not only what decisions were made, but why. And this is really helpful when you want people to, actively critique your ideas. So it's important to write down, when you're doing something, why it's also being done. And keeping that all written allows you to open up the entire stage for people to challenge, make suggestions, and build on each other's work. And it's important to remember that written communication isn't just your direct messages. It's when you're talking, over a Google document or in your meetings right now, if you speak in the chat. So keeping things public and allowing discourse to happen around what you're doing, especially in this public scenario, can really help open up people to what's going on across the company and making things more transparent. And in turn, this helps remove knowledge silos. It's much easier to silo knowledge if I were to have a one-on-one meeting with you, about one thing that I care about and then go to the next person. But I've taken special steps, obviously, to make sure, okay, this stuff is going to be public. This stuff is going to be recorded. All of the knowledge that is coming out of this meeting will be permanent, essentially, for as long as we want to keep it. It's also important that people know, sort of what everybody's doing. And this helps with the accountability thing as well. By writing about it and by engaging in this discourse, people can see your sort of place in the office, much like they would if you were walking around or sitting at your desk. It's that engagement you make with the platforms you're on is what gets you noticed and can definitely help as far as career advancement, as well as, career switching. Say you're interested in something and you don't know how to get into it. If, for instance, the front-end client team has a private channel and you think, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could, design a page for that, or, maybe try my hand at front-end development? you're probably not going to be able to find out where you can do that unless you just go Googling it. But by keeping things open, you allow people to enter in and gain an interest in what you're doing. So again, back to the written communication part, and there's a lot to figuring out how you can make asynchronous work for you, as well as how to do it. So asynchronous won't work for you if you require people to act immediately on a process, and asynchronous communication would slow it down. For instance, servers going down might not be the best time to bring out your asynchronity and hope that somebody comes on an hour later and tries to help you fix it. As well, it requires a lot of cohesion and organization. If you're communicating in 5 different channels and it's not really obvious where things string together, the amount of work you're creating for somebody to go back and forth between asynchronous messages really puts a damper on the whole experience and makes people not want to use it. As well, if you're client facing and, obviously if you have somebody who relies on you to be there for support, it can also be pretty tough to do things asynchronously. But this doesn't mean that you can't create notes for those people and create online knowledge bases that they can search for some minor problems. Other scenarios might be job interviews. Most people don't prefer their job interviews to be asynchronous, as they rely on that feedback from their potential interviewer in order to feel a sense that they're actually going somewhere in that job interview. So what benefits do you gain from this asynchronous work then if it doesn't work in these cases? Well, as I said before, there's more thoughtful communication when you're using asynchronous communication, because you can iterate on it. As I said, clicking that edit button so somebody knows what you're saying is something you can't do when you say something. As soon as these words leave my mouth, I can't really take them back. However, as soon as I write something in an editable document, it's pretty easy to change it up and sort of clarify for people who might be confused. It also allows to reduce stress. As I said, not working hour to hour and instead working when you feel best definitely helps reduce a lot of stress. And I know for a lot of people who experience, writer's block or, just any sort of block, you probably know that if you need a few hours rest and you can come back and you can work whenever you feel best, will lead to much better productivity for your amount of time. And obviously rest is really important as well. I get some of my best ideas when I'm in the shower for some reason. Other people get it right before bed. And if you're able to, host these ideas asynchronously and, maybe quickly write it down in the Slack, somebody might, look at your idea tomorrow morning, then you're almost like a much more creative person. You're holding yourselves back by not allowing your most creative self to come forward. So obviously asynchronous things are also much more planned. If, for instance, it's not like an emergency, you know exactly what your day is going to lay out and you can plan it much better. This is especially helpful for parents who probably have to structure their day around their kids, because that can be obviously a huge issue. And if you don't know when you're going to be busy, that can be a huge curtailing to your productivity. So certain conditions are required to make it work. If obviously, as I said, if you have a lot of ad hoc meetings where you're not writing clearly and your documentation skills aren't up to par, you'll definitely have a rocky road when it comes to making asynchronous work. It's all about how much information you can communicate via writing, and if that's not really your strong suit, then it's definitely something to work on. But if you know it's not your team's strong suit, then it can be very challenging to rely solely upon it. And asynchronous obviously isn't absolute. If you can make it asynchronous and you can make it public, do it. But there's certain things you can't make public. You probably don't want to make all your API keys public, or have HR meetings about specific employees just recorded and put online. But if you believe that there's a good reason that somebody could add on to it, then it's a great idea to make it public. And if you believe that you can wait a couple of hours before hearing back, then asynchronous communication is probably the way to go. And Now we're going to be talking a bit more about making things public again. So what would you want to make public is a really important question to ask yourselves. Making meetings and documents public can allow for broader communication between teams. More eyes means less mistakes, and scaling your team will be much easier. Again, if everything's public, then that means your onboarding experience as a new person is going to be just a click away. You'd be like, okay, I want to know what's happening, with the graphic design team. I enter the graphic design channel. I don't have to ask 3 people to enable me to enter said graphic design channel. So there's some important ways to kind of let things be public, and it's stuff I still try and use every day, and it's still a learning process. But using shared drives, particularly in Google Drive, can be a huge help. For instance, most of the stuff that I was doing previously is all on a shared drive. You guys can read it, edit it, comment it. It's able for everybody to look through and change. And if you have any questions, by posting a comment in there, I can better improve my work by having it questioned by all of you, and vice versa. If you feel like something's weird on another team, go over and look what they're doing. Maybe try and understand why things are the way they are. And if they did everything properly, you can better understand what's going on in the whole company. It's also important that you make a single source of truth. As I said before, you don't want to be going between 5 different conversations. By putting everything in one space, one wiki, one searchable index, it's way easier to get started and going, rather than knowing, okay, I'm going to have to dig through 5 things before I can even get started. As well as, if it makes sense, you can make your calendar public. I know, for instance, I've done this in this job where I had noticed there was something I was interested in. I was able to ask Colin, because he has a public calendar, if I could sit in on a meeting. And it really helped me sort of understand what was going on with the Cronus the Cronus platform at that time, and allowed me to, kind of make sure that it was like, yeah, I'm definitely interested in this, and I like what's going on there. But if it was all private, I never would have gotten that opportunity. Now, it's also important to realize what you shouldn't make transparent. As I said, your API keys, legal information. If you're talking about other people in like an HR format where you probably don't want them to know the discussion that's going on around them, it might be a good idea to not make that public. But public should always be default if you want the full asynchronous workplace to work. As well, being direct can also be a huge help. It's definitely a little bit weird, as I've tried to be more direct in my messages, because it comes off a little bit cold when you just respond with an emoji, or you immediately ask for what you need to ask. But if you receive a message that just says hi and then have to wait 5 minutes before you can think, they kind of just, it's going to be like, oh boy, what do they need? What do they need for 5 minutes? Your brain is already running a thread being like all the possible things that could go on. So being really fast and direct makes an easier reading experience, and as well allows people, just a more streamlined way to sort of manage their communications. Anyways, so here are some of the sources that I had going on. You guys can check them all out. There's a lot of great stuff in there. There's a lot on flow and positive psychology, as it's proven to make you happier. As well as, I took a lot of the inspiration from GitLab's handbook, which GitLab is the world's largest remote company before the pandemic. And they have all of their things public. They record every meeting and make quite a few of them public, as well as keeping all their processes, their whys, and their values online. So even people who don't work at the company can check it out and see what they're doing, which is especially great for recruiting, because you know exactly what you're getting into.